A dismal little offshoot of Frank Visser's ultra-materialist attack on Ken Wilber is called Integral Emergentist rEvolutionary, a bizarre attempt to cast Wilber's Buddhist non-dualism in terms of materialist emergentism. Emergentism is just another desperate attempt to shore up materialism, the ideology of the lifeless, mindless, meaningless, purposeless and pointless. To understand where emergentism originated, one need only consider the infamous problem of how mindless matter produces mind, and consciousness in particular. A reductionist seeks to explain the properties of things in the world in terms of the properties of the base constituents of reality. Plainly, as far as materialism goes, consciousness is impossible to reduce to matter, since no orthodox materialist claims that atoms are conscious in any way. However, unorthodox materialists, such as panpsychists, are indeed willing to attribute consciousness to all matter. Emergentism is an increasingly orthodox manifestation of materialist fundamentalism. The emergentists argue that consciousness, for example, does not reside in atoms, but in the particular organization of particular atoms. So, emergentists locate the birth of consciousness not in matter per se, but in the relations between material components. They assert that the organization of matter can produce novel properties, completely unpredictable in terms of the system's material constituents, and totally irreducible to the properties of its material constituents. This is therefore the most perfect way to insert magic and miracles into materialism. Whatever emerges from matter, regardless of how incompatible with materialism it is explained away as an emergent phenomenon that no one could have foreseen. And now these emergentists can start to dream of matter producing divine states of consciousness, a whole trans-rational order of miraculous properties that no one saw coming. You can see exactly why irrationalist Wilberites might be so attracted to emergentism. Panpsychist philosopher Peter Scherstedt H. presents an excellent case against emergentism. He wrote, "Emergentism states that mental states emerge from physical states. The problem here is that there are no known bridge laws that could describe how such emergence takes place, how physical movement could transition into that which is not physically describable, not to mention the problem of mental causation, as we shall see below." But why should we reject the popular theory of emergentism? Eminent philosopher of mind, Jae-Gwon Kim has claimed that it is no undue exaggeration to say that we have been under the reign of emergentism since the early 1970s. However, despite being known as one of the greatest exponents of emergentism, Kim is wary of its truth. The idea of emergence is an attractive, and initially appealing, one in many ways, and it is not difficult to understand its popularity. But it is not easy to make the idea precise and give it substantive content. Actually, it's impossible to give it substantive content. Just as panpsychism is one desperate way to buttress materialism, by giving atoms minds, emergentism is an alternative madcap scheme. Instead of putting mind in atoms, you leave atoms mindless, and instead locate mind in the relations between matter, as some miraculous property with no precedent. The game is always the same: to defend materialism, come what may, to oppose idealism, enormously better able to explain all things mental, at any price. Peter Scherstedt H. wrote, "It is easy to say that mind emerges from certain, say, neurological activities in the brain. But substantiating what this word emerges actually means and implies in such statements is far from easy. We cannot simply infer that as chemistry emerges from physics, and as biology emerges from chemistry, so sentience emerges from biology. No, there are no known laws of nature that can render explicable the emergence of emotion from motion, of sentience from insentience. Of course, to claim that biology comes from chemistry which comes from physics is already to unwittingly subscribe to ultramaterialism. The obvious question is, where does physics come from? It comes from mathematics, which is mental, not material. In other words, mathematics belongs to idealism, not materialism. It belongs to rationalism, not empiricism. However, Peter Scherstedt H. is absolutely right to point out that it's impossible in orthodox materialist terms to get from motion to emotion, from insentience to sentience. He tries to get round this by putting mind in matter. In fact, Mathematics is the answer. Mind is mathematics, and emotions and sentience are properties of the mind. They belong to the semantic as opposed to the syntactic layer of ontological mathematics. Peter Scherstedt H. wrote, furthermore, emergentism, as a physicalist doctrine, cannot accommodate mental causation, that mental events such as desire can have an effect upon the world, as mentality is not an accepted force of nature, yet most emergentists do not want to fall into epiphenomenalism, that mental states are powerless after effects of physical activity, the mere steam of a locomotive engine. But not being able to accept nor reject mental causation is to have your cake and eat it, which is essentially a reductio ad absurdum, a reduction to absurdity, a fatal infliction to emergentism. If mental causation did not exist, i.e. if epiphenomenalism were the case, then the activity of reasoning, of working things out, would be useless, and our desires, beliefs, and ambitions would be without any efficacy upon the world. Emergentism is all about having your cake and eating it, supporting the real emergence of mind from matter, while also denying the reality of mind, since it is deemed impossible for mental causation to override material causation. If it could, scientific materialism would come to an end. Emergentist materialism is just normal materialism, with the pointless claim added on that things associated with immaterialism emerge from material relations, but have no causal power, hence have no reason at all to exist. To understand how fallacious emergentism is, just imagine standard materialism without it. Imagine that life, mind, free will, the unconscious, subjectivity, qualia, consciousness did not emerge from matter. Why does lifeless, mindless matter have any requirement whatsoever for any of these things? None of these things appears in the theory of matter, or in any equation of science. There's not even any scope for any scientific equation to accommodate these things. The scientific world of matter could continue on its merry way without any emergence, and suffer no loss at all. So why doesn't it do exactly that? Emergence isn't designed to explain why matter does not behave in the way it ought to. Instead, it exists to explain away why the material world produces features 100% incompatible with materialism. No explanation of how matter produces consciousness is ever advanced by an emergentist materialist. Rather, the emergentist materialist simply says, we know that the organization of matter causes consciousness to emerge. But of course that's exactly what they don't know. They are, as ever, begging the question. To be an emergentist materialist, you first of all have to be a materialist, and that means you are going to paradigmatically exclude all idealist explanations of consciousness. Once you have done that, you have an extremely limited toolset with which to work. You have to locate mind in either matter itself, panpsychism, or in the relations of matter, emergentism. In neither case is mind actually defined, explained, and its laws revealed. In neither case is mental causation, how mind controls matter, explained in any way. If you're going to put forward a qualified materialism, Marxist dialectical materialism is far superior to either panpsychism or emergentism, especially since dialectical materialism can freely borrow from the supremely powerful philosophy of Hegel, a dialectical idealist. Peter Scherstedt H. wrote, Karl Popper, whose philosophy of science has had a large effect upon science through his notion of falsificationism, argued that epiphenomenalism is an anti-evolutionary theory. If the mind had no power, it would not have evolved nor survived, not only in us humans but presumably in other organisms as well. Sentience serves us well, but this implies that the physicalist ontology upon which emergentism is founded is flawed. Ultimately, it implies the irony that physicalism is an anti-evolutionary theory. Moreover, emergentism is anti-evolutionary not only because it cannot account for mental causation but also because it implies an inexplicable jump in evolution. As William James stated, consciousness, however small, is an illegitimate birth in any philosophy that starts without it, and yet professes to explain all facts by continuous evolution. Just like mainstream scientific materialists, emergentist materialists never engage with their critics and never refute any of their points. They just more and more loudly assert the correctness of emergentism, though it explains nothing and has no predictive qualities and is totally unfalsifiable. When anything comes along that refutes materialism, the materialist just says that the unexplained thing emerged, hence materialism is vindicated. What a joke. They might as well say that the power of God explains it. Peter Sherstead H. wrote, to summarize, emergentism cannot explain upward causation, matter-mind emergence, nor downward causation, as mental causation. If we consequently reject emergentism, if we reject the notion that mind emerged and emerges from matter, then we ipso facto accept that mind always existed with matter, panpsychism. No we don't. We accept idealism and that matter is the mathematical construct of mathematical mind, that dimensionless mathematical singularities, autonomous Fourier frequency domains, work together to produce a collective Fourier spacetime domain, a physical universe, actually a concrete mathematical hologram, with which they then interact. If Wilberism is bad, emergentist materialist Wilberism is even worse and even more incoherent and incomprehensible. Why don't all the materialist Wilberites just abandon Wilberism and accept the logic of their position, that they are out-and-out materialists who believe in atheism and nihilism, in a purposeless, meaningless, pointless universe predicated on randomness, a causation, chance, accident, probabilism, indeterminacy, uncertainty, indeterminism, the multiverse, the worst violation of Occam's razor, and so on. But these people are utterly intellectually dishonest. They're highly emotionally attracted to the whole Wilberite integral shtick and don't want to abandon it, even though their fundamentalist materialism is utterly incompatible with Wilberism. There is no such thing as integral materialism. There is only materialism. Materialism tells all non-materialists that they are absolutely wrong, hence materialism breaks the fundamental doctrine of integral that everyone is right. It's astounding just how irrational the Wilberite materialists are. No wonder Wilber despises them. They don't have a clue. Milton Friedman said, only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable. Emergentism and panpsychism are just alternatives the materialists have come up with to address the materialist crisis, its ongoing and absolute inability to explain mind. One day, they will give up. At long last, materialism will fall, and be replaced by mathematical idealism and rationalism, ontological mathematics.